We have been in for a few weeks now a series called Dream On. We're working through the book of Joshua together. And if you're new to the Bible or have no idea who or where Joshua is, that is all right. We'll work through that together. But we spent the last 4 or 5 weeks inside that book and looking at that story as God's people were moving from not having an identity, from being slaves in a different country, to actually having their own land, moving to this thing that they refer to as the promised land. So if you have a Bible, we're going to be in Joshua in a moment. You're welcome to go ahead and start finding your way there. But last week, as we looked through what was next for them, they being the people of God, the people of Israel, they overtook a city called Jericho. It was the first major battle as they were moving into this thing called the Promised Land. And it was a very unique battle. It was an incredible experience. It was one I'm sure that they could not stop talking about, had trouble sleeping. They are walking around the city, pacing, blowing horns, screaming, trusting God, collapsing walls, and taking names. I mean, they're just having a time, enjoying themselves, and looking at what God can do in front of everybody. There was no doubt that it wasn't them. There was no doubt that it was not just military strength. It was God's favor on their lives as they watched those walls go down. So after the battle's over, they come back together, and I'm sure pretty eager for the next one. Also pretty sure that the warriors and those who actually wielded swords looked at the guys blowing the trumpets and said, "You guys can sit this next one out. Let us take this one." And they waited on Joshua to give the orders, and they went to Joshua and said, "What's next?" And they look at their little map. I'm not quite sure how advanced the map is, but they know that next on the map is a city that we read in English as Ai, A-I. It was the next city. It was not nearly as large as Jericho. It wasn't fortified with big walls like Jericho was. And we're told that Ai had at the most 12,000 people living inside of it, and that included women and children. And we know that women and children were not in their military, so roughly a third of that crew were actually soldiers, maybe even less. We don't know for sure. But Joshua went to his people and said, "Guys, this is light work. After what we did at Jericho, we don't need the entire army. So let's put together a couple of guys, a couple of units, 3,000 people in all. We'll send you in. You take over Ai. We'll get busy on working on what's next, and we'll come back together once that is over." They send 3,000 soldiers out, confident, ready to go. And in record time, they return. But they return beaten and bloodied, battered and bruised, and incredibly confused at what just happened. They experience this huge battle, this win in Jericho, feeling like nothing can stop them. And now they go to this small city of Ai, and they are routed. Joshua is on his face before God, stunned, shocked, embarrassed, and a little worried. And we read what he said to God in Joshua chapter 7, verse 6. It says, "He tore his clothes and he fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, 'Sovereign Lord, why did you bring us across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Ammonites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been defeated by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?'" So Joshua is at the end, and he's before God saying, this is the worst thing that could have happened. Because our advantage was that people were afraid of you, God. You had your favor and your power on us. These pagan cities don't even know who you are. They don't know your name, and yet they're afraid of you. And that was our advantage. And if we lose the intimidation advantage, if we lose that confidence, we're going to lose the battle, and then we're destroyed. And he turns it around and says, "And God, what about your name? Like, your name is riding on this too. Okay, we're wiped out. Okay, we're gone. But what about your name? Because we were the evidence, the visible, tangible evidence of an all-powerful creator who is above all. And if his own people lose and are wiped out, then your name is gone as well. So he is at the end of his confidence rope, and God comes back to him and replies and says, here's what's gone on in verse 10. Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. And that is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. What he's referring to is that prior to the Battle of Jericho, God had given them some really specific instructions. He said, when you go into Jericho and you're going to take this city, when you get there, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to catch your eye, but leave it alone. We're going to destroy it along with everything else in Jericho. There will be some things that will be set aside for the treasury, for God's people. He said, but don't take stuff for yourself. Just leave it. Leave it alone. Let it be a part of what the curse that I'm going to bring down on this entire city. And even though the instruction was very, very clear, someone in the group, someone in the army took something that did not belong to him. It took something that God had said stay away from. He took it for himself. And as a result, God says, I know that in this moment, there is someone who has broken the faith with me, has broken the covenant that I had. I told you, if you followed me completely, success wherever you put your foot. But you didn't. Someone in the group violated that covenant. As a result, my favor's off of you, my power's off of you, and this is what happens when you don't have my favor. So the thing that Joshua was going to have to understand and wrap his mind around was that at this battle, the entire family, the entire army, the entire nation of Israel fell because one member chose not to do his job or her job. He didn't know who it was at that time. Someone chose to break the covenant, and it affected everyone. Now, I am sure that this person had no idea the effect that this decision would have on everyone else. I'm sure when he took whatever he took for himself, he wasn't trying to sabotage the entire nation. He wasn't trying to destroy the mission. He wasn't a double agent. He wasn't trying to mess things up. He just saw something he wanted. He knew what the law was and thought, it's not a big deal. This is about me. This is not about us. I'm just taking this thing. It's not going to hurt anyone. It was going to be destroyed anyway. What is the big deal? And God said, the big deal is I told you not to do it. As a result, I'm removing my hand from your army. No more favor. And they fell as a result. And there's a principle here that I think that you and I still need to hold on to that works then and it works now. And the principle is my faith is personal, but not private. We at times, we being people of God, talk about a relationship with Jesus, meaning a personal relationship with Jesus. And we use the word personal because we know that it's important that at some point we move from just believing there is a God to saying, I'm going to follow that God for myself. We move away from the faith of our parents and saying, this is also my faith now. I am choosing to follow him. I'm choosing to wear that name. I'm choosing to say yes to Jesus. I'm not just going to rely on my church or my home, whatever it is. It's going to be mine, my personal relationship. But although that is perhaps true, we often at times make that personal claim and treat it like it's private. Like what I do with God, how I follow God, that's just between the two of us. It doesn't involve you. It doesn't involve other people. What I choose to do here, the decisions I choose to make, A or B, one or two, right or left, him or her, whatever the thing is, the decisions I choose are between God and me. It doesn't involve you. And although I know what we mean when we want that and say that, there is nothing we can do that ultimately does not affect relationships around us. It's never private. It always affects other people. So I want us to work through a few questions today to ask prior to making decisions. You say, well, we don't always have time to stop and ask questions, much less 5. I get that. But when we do have the opportunity to step back and make a decision, I want to give you 5 of those. So if we could put those on the screen now. 5. No, that was the rough draft. No, go to the next thing. The next one. Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I write things and then say, oh, that would come across wrong. I just forgot to delete. My bad. Okay. 5 questions to ask for all of my relationships. 5 questions that we ask ourselves prior to making the decision. The first one is this: how will this decision affect my confidence when I meet with God? If I choose this, if I feel freed up to choose it, if God has not clearly said right or wrong, it's just kind of an I don't know. When I'm making those kinds of decisions, how is this going to affect my confidence when I meet with God? When you say something about someone else, whether you meant it maliciously or not, whether it was an accident, whether you were just kidding, whatever it is, and it makes it back to that person, you're very rarely excited about seeing that individual because it's just really awkward. There's a lot of looking away. There's a lot of how do I word this? There's a lot of saying extra stuff to help them see you didn't really mean it. It just creates a really weird environment the next time you get together. And there are moments when we know in our heart that this is just not God's plan. This is not what he wants for me. And we do it anyway. And it immediately changes how we view ourselves in the presence of God. And we don't want to be alone with God. We want to be with a people group because I don't want to see him. Let's just all be collective and I'll hide somewhere in the corner. I don't want to be me with him. I can't be genuine in that moment. And God desires that we are all in when we're with him and completely invested with him in the moment, before him, with honesty, with authenticity, being very genuine. And we just don't do that when we've stepped outside of the covenant that God has made with us, when we know we've stepped outside of the boundaries that he has set up. And when we make those decisions, it immediately affects the way we view ourselves in God's presence. And we're very hesitant to even ask for God to move. We're very hesitant to assume that he would want to spend any time with us. We're not even sure that God loves us. Or God likes us. We're just hoping that he loves us. It's a very weird environment. And so the first question is to ask, how is this going to affect the next time God and I meet with each other? Is this going to make it really weird or not? The second question, how will this decision make God trust me more or less? God's word is very clear that when we're faithful with the little, God then adds. When we're faithful with opportunities, God opens more doors for us. When we've proven that God can trust us with something, he then in turns grants us more. Now, it doesn't mean everyone who has a lot has done a bunch of great things, but there is a principle here that we cannot avoid. And so as I'm making decisions, do I do this or do I not? Do I say yes or do I not? Do I go there or do I stay back? Do I watch that or do I look away? Do I listen to that or do I change where I am? When we're making those decisions, does this make God look down and go, yeah, I can trust him now. He's taking steps. He's growing. He's getting stronger. I can trust him in this way. Or does God look down and go, oh, I really had wanted him to be here, but I'm going to have to put someone else in this position that I can trust. Is God going to trust me more or less? The third question to ask, how will this decision change how my family sees me? Every decision we make will not just affect, but change how the people in our homes or in our inner circle, or however your living situation is. If you're single, your people and your crew. If you're a kid, your mom, dad. If you're married, then your spouse. Maybe you have kids. How will this decision affect and even change how the people in my home see me? We often, as parents, those of us who have kids, know that raising kids just changes your life, not always for the better. Like, it is hard. It is challenging. There are all sorts of wrinkles and bags that just show up the moment you walk out of that hospital with that kid. You don't recognize yourself in the rearview mirror of your car. The second you put a car seat in the back, you're immediately 12 years older. And we all know it. We've all seen it. It changes. We're edgy at home, and we're like, we're just kind of frustrated a lot of the time. And it's a hard thing to do. But let me ask you teenagers something. How often do you feel like you're losing your mind having to be raised by us? Because we often think about all the patience and all the forgiveness we have to give as parents. But there are a lot of times when we adults make decisions in which we're forcing kids that are way too young to have to do this to just have more and more grace and more grace and more mercy and more forgiveness for us because we continue to let them down. And we can say, well, we're the parent, respect us. Okay. But there's also a way to create that atmosphere of trust and of admiration and respect if we'll just do the right thing. Every single decision I make, whether or not I am in my residence, in my house or not, every decision I make either builds trust or creates doubt between my wife and me. Every single decision. It may have nothing to do with the relationships, but it's just her going, this is the man of God that I wanted to marry, and this is how I know he would respond. And when she finds out I didn't respond in the same way, it erodes. It affects that way. My kids know and they want a dad who is strong, who will love their mom the way that she deserves to be loved, who will raise his family the way and will have respect and integrity and on and on and on. I could sit back all day and tell my son, well, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, including your dad, and that's fine. But he deserves a dad who at least is putting his heart into it, who's trying to live a life that would invite that kind of respect. Every single decision I make is affecting how the people in my home see me. We don't do anything alone. There's nothing private. It's all interconnected. Number 4, how will this decision affect my ability to lead people to Jesus? Tell you, well, that's not really my deal. That's you. You're the preacher. It is true. My job is to preach the news of Jesus, the good news. But it's all of our responsibility to lead people home. You have opportunities, you have people in your lives that I will never be around, nor will any other pastor or preacher be around. And truth be told, most of the people in your life do not want to have a preacher in their inner circle. That's just not really a thing most people want. And that's okay, because you're there. And you have an opportunity to lead them. And every single decision you make is either giving you more of a ground to stand on when you finally bring up the name of Jesus or invite them to come to church or whatever the invitation is, or it's putting you in a place where when you say, hey, you want to join me or join us on Sunday, they may think, you're a believer? Wouldn't have guessed that. That's not ideal. That is not really what we want. We'd like to have it more of, I thought eventually you were going to say something. I knew eventually you were going to ask. I had a feeling that that's the way you were. Not a surprise. And every single decision we make is going to affect that. There were times throughout the New Testament times, a couple of thousand years ago, in which people were trying to figure out how to live this new relationship with Jesus and also come out of where they were. And one of the issues was eating meat. There was meat that was set aside for idols, sacrifice in a pagan kind of way, in a pagan culture. And then people became followers of Jesus, and many of them thought, well, you can't touch that meat anymore because that's the meat that's been sacrificed to idols. And others thought, well, this is not a big deal. It's just meat. So this is about the faith. This is about relationship with God. It's something spiritual. This is not physical. It doesn't matter what you eat. And there's a man named Paul who wrote a letter to a church in a city called Corinth. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31, this was his advice. He said, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God. Even as I try to please everyone in every way, for I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. He said, whatever you do, eating, drinking, whatever your activity is, make sure all of it honors God. Because in the end, you don't want to miss out on the opportunity to lead someone home just because you've got this freedom to do this thing. Okay, you're free to do it, fine, but how is it going to affect other people? Because every single decision you make is going to affect someone else. And then fifth and finally, will this decision strengthen or weaken my church family? And that's probably the one that we think the least. Because we don't really feel like we have that much of a commitment to each other. Most every Sunday, you're sitting by a stranger. Now you've got your place and you come in, and then as over the last few months, as this room has gotten filled out more and more, you're getting moved out of your place, you're in a new spot, you're people you don't know, like you don't feel necessarily responsible to them. But we as a church are one body and we're all together in this. So whenever one part is sick, whenever one part is not healthy, it affects everyone else, and every decision we make along the way affects the whole body. There are plenty of things that I don't see a big deal with, but I have to step back and think, how is this going to affect the church? How is this going to affect the people that are counting on me to say no to that, or to say yes to that, or to walk towards that, or to walk away from that? It just can't be that big a deal. And in the book of Romans, there was a letter written to the church in Rome, and that same one who wrote the letter to the church in Corinth wrote these words. He said, "Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All food is clean, but it is wrong for a person to eat anything that causes someone else to stumble." He says, man, you're right. It's not a big deal. It's just food. God gave it all to us, but it's not worth it. Like, how good is that cake? Like, it doesn't really matter if it's going to affect other people in such a way that they're going to be turned off. He said, it's not that big a deal. Just stay away, step back, walk away from it because of the effect it has on other people. So Joshua's in that spot, and he's got this group of people, and they realize now one person has goofed up, and it's affected everybody. And Joshua said, we're not ending the mission here. Now I know what the problem is. And I don't know if you've ever seen those little dolls that are like it's a doll inside of a doll, inside of a doll, inside of a doll, or whatever it's called. That was what Joshua was apparently inventing here. And what he did the next morning, he called out all the leaders of the tribes of Israel. There were 12. And out of those 12, it was determined that one of the tribe that was guilty was Judah. So he had all the people of Judah step forward outside of the other tribes. So Judah steps forward. Within that tribe, there were clans, and they decide that there's a guy named Kerith, and it was his clan that had the problem. So he and his family kind of stepped forward. So you kind of got this thing happening just inside of another one, inside of another one, inside of another one. Then another guy came out. He said, okay, of you, there is a family here that's at fault. And one of those families was chosen. And that guy stepped out. And Joshua said, it's one of your kids. And Achan stepped forward and said, it's me. I did. I took it. I was there. I didn't think it was a big deal. I took some stuff into my tent. I dug a hole. I hid it. It's in my tent right now. And Joshua sent some men off. They went to the tent. They investigated. They found the stuff, and they came out. And everything in us and our understanding of how we ought to live as a church family now that Jesus has come and forgiven us of our sins, we want to believe that Achan knelt down and the family cried over him. But if you read through Joshua, the rest of it, you see they all said, everybody grab a rock. And they stoned the guy, killed him, burned up everything he had, and said, now we go to war again. And the entire army went into Ai, and they took the nation, or took the city, and then they moved forward and continued to progress. A terribly tragic and awful, awful situation. One guy, not meaning any harm, just thinking, just go into business for myself here. I'm going to take this. It won't hurt anyone. And it affected the entire nation, and he lost his life over it. You say, well, I hate to think what the application here is this morning. Are we going to stand up and be like, no, this is not a whodunit kind of day for us, okay? But it is a reminder that as we continue to walk out the dream God has for us, and you as individuals, as you walk out the dream God has for you, your family, your situation, that there may be moments in which you are losing battles that you never should lose. And you're falling down when you're way too strong to be giving into this stuff. And you're going to step back and go, what happened? God, have you stopped loving me? Have you given up on me? What have you done? How could you fail us? And the answer might be right beneath our feet. And in that moment, we can't do anything about what we've done. We just fall on God's great mercy and say, God, I did it. It's me. And moving forward, I want to make decisions that are going to help everyone, because nothing is private, even the personal things. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you've chosen not to follow him up until today because of some people around you who acted unfaithfully to the covenant that God had for them. On behalf of my whole family, because every follower of Jesus is a part of my family, I want you to know we're sorry. And there may be some of you who are not yet followers of Jesus because of some of us in this room, because you caught us in moments in which we were selfish and we're thinking only of ourselves, and we made decisions that hurt other people. And you deserve better. But in the end, it begins with trusting Jesus for who he is, not for who his people at times aren't. It gives us no excuse, but you still need to make that decision. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I want to invite you to trust him today.